Felicity, hello.
Hi, everybody.
Good to see you.
Thanks. I'm still getting settled, so if I pop in and out, don't be offended.
Okay.
Don't be offended. That's such a, I mean, you can be offended, but I'm not going to care.
That's the way to be.
Why?
I'm looking for the thing Lance sent us. Are we doing this, you guys?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm looking for that. That's what I'm...
Go on to the website. Actually, if you just go to Agora Foundation and go to coming events, you can download it again right there.
Okay. I think
you
it's
mean
here,
the
though.
script, right?
Yeah, well, all the links to the music and then all the readings are there.
No, but the secret reading.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Oh, okay.
The thing.
That was via email. I'll send it to you right now again.
No, I got it.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
I got it on my phone.
Okay.
I'm going to get us some water.
Okay.
I just have a few windows
keep
open.
connecting with our ends. And doesn't matter what kind of sensation. Lesson, blessing, people,
Let me
virtue.
let me share my screen.
Any kind of sensation. Just
It is shared.
Yep, it's sharing now.
Okay. So let me just play this and people will come in, and then this is the way I want to begin.
Okay.
okay, now we will do some more meditation exercise.
If you see any of those baggy pants, it was huge.
Maybe there's sensation, maybe there's no sensation. So be aware of whatever
Mr.
there
Bojangles.
in your hand. Okay?
Mr. Bojangles. Mr. Bojangles.
Join both of your hands.
I reach you.
Be aware of tactile.
Now,
look. What do you feel? Oh my. So fast.
It could be a balloon.
Now heat. Be aware of heat. Okay.
Mr. Bojangles.
What do you feel? Right? Be aware of heat. And cool also.
If you see any of those baggy pants, check the hills. It was huge.
Oh, these are the days, my friend.
If you know it was a
Now.
to be answered the telephone.
Sit down.
And
And keep your spine straight. Bring your hand close to your forehead.
it
Almost touch your forehead. The hair. The
I reach you. The scarf I wear in black and white. This is about the
Please
things on the
close your
table.
eyes. And please be aware of any sensation in your forehead.
If you see any of those baggy pants, check the hills. It was huge.
Right. Also, now,
This one could be
please
counted
close your eyes.
the scarf of wears in black and white. This is about the things on the table.
In your
If you know it was a violin to be, answer the telephone. And if anyone asks you, please, it was trees.
all even
It's like that. Mr. Bojangles. Mr. Bojangles. I reach
And these are
the scarf
my days.
of where
These are the days, my friend.
now please move from your forehead to top of your head
We
and relax
meet
muscle
everyone.
the head.
I didn't know the spoken part of that was different every time.
On the top of your head.
This is not. There's someone else's mic on, or is it?
Yeah, something's playing by somebody somewhere.
Maybe we could mute everyone. Everyone's mic.
It seems to have stopped. Yeah.
Now
Yeah,
from
because
top of the head to the back of the head.
Oh, somebody's still playing something. It might be, is it Lourdes?
Be aware of sensation.
There she goes. Okay.
I wanted to play that because I played this piece for my music class, music since 1900, on Tuesday. And we're socially distant, but in a good-sized room with very good speaker system. And we were bathed in the sound of this. And I felt like I couldn't talk about it after. A student came up to me and said, "Oh, what a wonderful piece. I love that kind of music. What do you call that? You know, what style is it?" And I said, "Well, we don't want to talk about it. You know," and it was interesting when you're so moved by an experience, by a felt sensuous experience, and then all of a sudden you try to put it into words. Unless someone who shared the experience with you, you know, it's hard to convey that. And that's what this seminar opportunity is about. I'd like to see everyone who's on here, and maybe have them introduce themselves. I thought what would be nice is just to say your name and where you are now, because you could be anywhere. In a few words, what maybe 3 or 4 words or no more than a sentence, why are you here? What's your connection to music, your interest in music? And we can go, yeah.
Let me just mention 2 things. One is, if you go up to the top of your screen and you click on the Zoom US preferences, maybe just turn yourself up a little bit.
Okay.
It's just a little quiet.
Okay, maybe that's my own computer, but I'm up all the way now.
Oh, you are? Okay. And then the second thing is,
There's input volume.
yep. I mean, it's not bad. I'm just kind of encouraging. And then I think might be something where when you shuffle papers or something on the desk, it seems to be affecting the microphone. So just be cautious about that.
Okay. I haven't
Yep.
touched it yet. Okay.
Please continue. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah. Thanks. So how do we go?
Why don't you choose, because you're seeing everybody on the screen, right?
I have to look at gallery view, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, does everybody know you, Andy?
No, not everybody. I'll start. I'm Andy Gilman, the director of the Agora Foundation. And the reason why we're here in general is that we believe that there is a huge body of work of all different kinds that is very much worth going through, thinking about, slowing down for. And there's something really amazing that happens. In the Greek word is dialogue. So literally through logos, through conversation, that reason emerges in some spectacular way. And I would say music is no different. In fact, it's central for us, right into the middle of that. And it's, as I've said a few times here, it's really where the gods show themselves in regular mortal life, among other places. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Jim, how about you? If you can unmute yourself.
Did he call me? Oh, yeah. I'm Jim. I'm from Simi Valley. I was interested because it was on the list of seminars this weekend. I found the reading interesting. Anything that can expand my horizons, make me more human. I'm a recovering lawyer. I try cases for a living, and the more I can be like the average Joe and have interests in common with, the more effective I am. But I really enjoyed the reading.
Good for you. Thank you. Laura.
I'm Laura, and I'm in Ventura, California, and I really enjoyed the reading also. I'm very, very interested in words and choosing just the right words to amplify the exact feeling, which is just a lifelong pursuit. I'll never get there, but I love going.
Thank you. Miranda.
Hi, my name is Miranda, and I'm in Hollywood, And I have a 40-year career in the movie industry, and I interfaced with people often, almost always, who write movie scores. And currently, I'm at a dance studio right now, so you may hear ambient phone sounds and music wafting through the room. So in trying to listen to this music in this space, it was interesting to think if he would have included the salsa bachata music wafting through the wall in some of his pieces. I had to embrace it.
I think so. Yeah. Thank you, Miranda. Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Pierre Schubert. I'm not related to the composer Schubert, but I'm related to another composer Schubert with an H. And this one was living in St. Petersburg. So I am interested in music, and especially everything Lance has to teach, because this is something that I don't know.
Merci. Thank you.
Oh,
Ani and Yabra? I'm sorry.
it's Joanne and Dave.
Joanne and Dave.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Go ahead, Dave.
I'm Dave. I basically, most of my career has been as a scientist, engineer. However, all of my family are musicians. My two children both were in rock and roll bands, play the guitar, and with age have gone toward classical music and folk. And I just am fascinated by music.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And I'm Joanne Yaproff, and I have been lately fascinated by vibration and sound baths and different frequencies, and also the words that can try and convey the emotional and physical aspects of music. Although to me, when it's most profound is when you don't even want to clap. You just want to feel it and let it wash over you.
Yeah. I think clapping should be banned in some concerts just to absorb the experience. Yeah. Thank you. And Barry.
I'm Barry. I'm in Ojai. I've enjoyed music for a long time, from going to concerts by Hendrix and the Doors and Dylan, Joni Mitchell, those folks, to somewhat transitioning. I saw Andres Segovia in 1971, and that interested me in classical music. So I've been going to, or art music, as we might say, to the LA Philharmonic since 1986. And what I find interests me about this seminar is it's doing something that I think is really very important, and that is pushing the limits, encouraging me to listen to things that I otherwise simply wouldn't come across. Although Ives I have come across. In fact, I heard a Symphony 2 earlier this year. But I'm just looking to it very much for the same reason Jim is, to expand my horizons.
Yeah. Good. Well, you're in a good place for that. I understand they have a festival in June.
Yes.
When there's
Yes.
a pandemic. Yeah.
Very good one.
Yep.
Andy, I think you're on the board for that, aren't you?
No, I'm on actually with Joanne and Laura on Bravo, where when things are normal, we go to the schools and bring a bunch of instruments for the kids to try out. So it's more education in that sense. But
great. Eric?
I'm Eric Stull. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland. And I spend a fair amount of time looking at poetry with students. And so I think about the music of words, but I find music itself, despite my love of it, somewhat elusive to talk about sometimes. So I suppose I'm here just to listen to an intelligent conversation about American music, which I think is one of the more charming parts of our culture.
Where do you teach?
I'm an adjunct at a number of schools here in Maryland, Bowie State University, is one. So I've taught at about half a dozen schools over the last 14 years. I taught at the University of Baltimore for a long time, a humanities course there. So.
Great. Well, thank you. And Carrie is next on my screen.
Hi, I have a stormy on again, off again relationship with music. I'm just hoping she'll take me back.
With open arms, yeah. Felicity.
Oh, I'm glad I'm next because I get to tell Carrie she'll never abandon you. Never. She wants your full attention sometimes. That could be the problem. I'm Felicity. I'm a musician and a spoken word artist. So words are my thing. And I'm always amazed at, I love music from like early music, Baroque, contemporary classical, rock and roll, folk, like it's all part of the symphony in my head, the overall symphony of music. But I'm always intrigued about how to talk about music because I grew up in the orchestra playing cello, and now I make folk music that's layered with rock and roll, and I have a very difficult time sometimes explaining to my other musicians what I want them to sound like. And so language and music are constantly colliding for me, like the language of somebody who grows up playing, rock guitar is different, when I say, okay, what do you want me to play here? They're asking for notes and technique, and I'm going, can you make it sound, here's where it sounds like a single violin, and then in this section it should sound like a whole bunch of string section, and just trying to communicate those types of things that are so visual or so auditory in my head to make them come out in a concrete way is interesting. And then, the academic analysis of it is also interesting. And I hear so many people saying, and I think, Lance, this is what you spoke to or you're inspired by, I'll send people my songs and I go, well, I don't know anything about music, or I don't know how to talk about these things. And I'm dumbfounded by that. Just say whatever comes up, so.
Thank you, dear.
And I'm in Ojai with all the festival nerds.
Brentwood, there's Candy, Marjorie Goodman. Hi, Candy.
Hi, I'm in Los Angeles, and I'm a retired linguistic anthropologist. I'm very interested in intonation and the musicality of language. And I am a frequent attender of concerts of the LA Phil, and I very much miss it. And I very much miss the pre-concert talks, especially Russell Steinberg. And so I know that Lance, who is a friend of mine, is going to open me up to understanding the music that we'll be listening to and that we have listened to in new ways. And Ives is one of my favorite composers.
Thank you. Adriana Leah, nice to see you.
Very nice to see you, Dr. Brunner. Nice to meet everybody. My name is Adriana Leah Mautz. I'm writing my dissertation. I'm concluding my DMA in voice performance at the University of Kentucky. I have the honor to have in my committee Dr. Brunner. So I'm pioneering a research about a Spanish composer that is extremely famous and it is not really well known. I'm researching his art song production. And there is a lot of things involved in there. There is obviously a musicological aspect as well as performative aspect as well. And there is a lot of description, involved in music, but I want to make it more accessible to the reader and make it really meaningful, full of substance. I want people really understand how exciting it is, really, all this material. I want to present this composer really to the States, and I really would love to have to be able to offer my best, trying to represent, this what I consider my mission, So it is just very important for me. And while obviously reading about Charles Ives, I was kind of shocked to see that there are some nice parallels in between both composers, you know. So it was really, really elucidating for me to have that experience. I'm very excited about this. Very, very excited.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming all the way from
Very well.
Lexington. Lulu, are you on? I think she's eavesdropping. Right? She'd be in and out. That's my wife.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, where I am. Oh, I'm here. Hello, everybody. I am an overhearer today. I have been hearing the preparation of the seminar, so I have heard some pieces, but I wanted to join and feel the energy of the group. So I'll be in my little corner, just taking part. It's really great to see you, Laura and Andy and everybody.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Lourdes is also a linguistic anthropologist.
I'm also a linguistic anthropologist, and my dear friend Candy is there. So, hi, Candy.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, great. A diverse group of, I would classify you as adventurous listeners, you know, as people who want to learn, expand their horizons, be challenged, and to learn. Even just from what's been said, it's interesting there. I would recommend Licity. I would recommend, let me see, what's his name? There's a book called Performing Rights. Do you know that book? It's, I'll think of his name in a minute, but it's on popular music, and he begins each chapter with dual epigraphs. And they're very funny because they're clashing. And one of the chapters is, has a short paragraph by a musicologist analyzing a rock song and pointing out that it uses venerable musical techniques, structural techniques like the passacaglia or the chaconne of the Renaissance, and, you know, very, very precise description. And the other quote is from one of the two guys who wrote the song. It says, "Yeah, me and Jimmy Woo got all screwed up in the back of the truck and just laid down this line." Well, this is what it was. So it's interesting because he shows the contrast between the two worlds, you know, and that's this. I mean, as this approach, I kept seeing this kind of thing everywhere. So that I mentioned that the New York Times article. What does it say? Listening with head and heart. Well, this is an article about wine, about the wine cellar, and where he has that passage. What did he say? Those people who know about wine, have studied wine with the science of wine, have a vocabulary. Those who don't basically talk about it from an emotional place. And it's the same if you substituted music into that phrase for wine, because it's really any sensual experience is hard put to translate, really impossible to translate into word. But well, we'll talk about that since this is the whole purpose of it. But it really began in 1971 when I was a graduate student and reading Notes magazine. I think I put this in the introduction. And I was reading a review by a independent scholar named Gilbert Chase, who was writing about these books on rock, and said, you know, I shudder to think of the day when rock will be dissected in the lugubrious morgues of graduate student seminars. And since I was on my way to be leading graduate student seminars and any seminars, that was almost 50 years ago, and it's always stuck. It kind of haunted me. Is my seminar a lugubrious morgue? You know, I mean, am I taking this live music, you know, and sucking the blood out of it and, you know, analyzing it in a way? Or is there a way to talk about something like music, as complex as music, with precision, but also with heart, you know, a meeting place? And I think that there are writers and people think there's musicians who can do that. And part of my goal or intention here was to introduce you to some of those writers that I think are really good or have been successful about using language to describe music in ways that is helpful. And I recall the writer Ellen de Santillanes, who's an anthropologist who studies the arts, and says, that we're in a hyper-literate situation. She said, I think that one of the purposes of books is to tell us what it was like to be without books. And one of the reasons to use language about music is to send you, of course, back to the music, right? In ways that are enticing and inviting. So that I feel like, if those few sentences of that review 49 years ago, I shudder to think of when, the lugubrious morgues at graduate student seminars, what is it that sticks? And I was looking at last week's book review in the New York Times, and Dwight Garner, who writes a column called Mark My Words, was talking about his, what did he call them? Commonplace books where he writes down slogans. I mean, maybe you have journals yourself or diaries where a phrase or a sentence, particularly if you're a writer or a poet, an image that strikes you, and to collect them. Because some of those things stay and they become like a compass or a guide. And so I wanted to introduce you to some of that influential writing so that you could continue your exploration, to encourage you to explore that relationship by listening to language, and to share writings afterwards. So that's why I picked those particular things. I'd have to say it was really hard, and Andy knows, because the initial list that I sent was to include all my favorite writers, and he said, it's too much, let's settle on a few. So what I decided to do was to introduce you to, or to have brief sections of some really remarkable writers about music. And this really is in the realm of critics, historians, biographers. And I realized too that, there are very important words about music in poetry. Beyond the fact that poetry is musical in several dimensions or parameters, but also in novels, short stories, like the great Eudora Welty short story Powerhouse about jazz is writing of jazz. So there's a lot more other ways that we could explore this, but I'm doing it from the perspective of critics and historians and biographers. And I think one passage that I really, one of these luminous quotes or passages, more than we need to understand, we need to appreciate. Or maybe before we learn to understand, we can learn to appreciate. And that, I think, suggests that we bring an attitude or an openness or a quality to things that we want to understand, so that they can connect to us in an affective way before we take them apart or try to understand or explain things. So to me, luminous writing about music, or vivid writing about music, sometimes has the same effect on me as music does. And what would that be? Almost goosebumps sometimes, like, ooh, we'll look at a few of those phrases in a minute or so. Or teary, or something that connects. There's one writer, a historian, Richard Crocker, who's a medievalist like me, writing about medieval music. And he used two words to describe a gradual, which is a very elaborate type of chant that's sung in the Mass, in Gregorian chant. and it doesn't have any particular form. And you want to try to get a handle on it, but it's just, and he described it as rhapsodically ornamental, which is such a useful phrase to me to help approach music that's not organized in a way like a pop song would be, with returns and so forth. I was kind of thinking that's maybe that also describes our thinking process, is rhapsodically ornamental, of weaving ornaments and theme around a particular theme. So let's take a look at some of these writers. And I'm not sure that everyone had a chance to do the reading. I just want to mention George Bernard Shaw, because as a great, known, of course, as a great playwright, not as well known as a music critic, but in his day, he was a prominent music critic with a particular kind of wit and sarcasm that characterized his writing overall. And that little passage I had was just lifted from a kind of tirade against a very academic writer with a very academic name. What was his name? H. Heathcote Stratham, newly published essay from form and design in music. And I give you that passage where he described the principal subject hitherto only heard in the treble is transferred to the bass, the violins playing a new counterpoint to it instead of its original mere accompaniment figure of the first, and so forth. Then the parts are reversed, the violin and so forth. It's basically a antiseptic description of it. And Shaw quipped, how succulent this is and how full of Mesopotamian words like the dominant of D minor. And to demonstrate how meaningless such descriptions are to the general reader, then he analyzed Hamlet's soliloquy on suicide in the same scientific style as follows. And I think you've read that. Shakespeare, dispensing with the customary exordium, announces the subject at once in the infinitive, right? And so forth. Just kills it, right? And so I would encourage you to look, to read some of Shaw's writings, particularly if you're a fan of some of his plays. It's quite extraordinary. So I just wanted to mention that, and then to move to one person, a composer actually, Virgil Thomson, who is considered actually one of the greatest music critics. He was born in 1897, I think, or 96. He spent time in Paris studying with Nadia Boulanger and hung out with Gertrude Stein and Alice Toukalas and Picasso. And there's a kind of a artistic clique in the 1920s that a lot of composers went to. But he made a living then in the 1940s and 50s writing for the Herald Tribune. And so he's one of course, he has very specialized knowledge as a composer, but he was writing for the general public. And his writing is really, really brilliant. I wanted to choose several, but I just chose the short one. One on Hindemith, maybe I can send you a link to that, is really a riot, because he says, what did he say? Things like, let's give you a flavor of it. Talking about a new opera called Neues von Tage. And I remembered having been amused by the way he managed to write music for that work that was at the same time both ponderous and cute. So that kind of juxtaposition makes me want to hear the music. How something could possibly sound ponderous and cute, and maybe, of course, maybe it might not seem like that to me. Maybe it would seem more ponderous or more cute, or neither. But the point is about the writing that it's evocative in a way. I chose this one because he wrote a Sunday column in the Herald Tribune every Sunday. And he chose to write on Haydn, Beethoven, and Mozart, the three great Viennese composers in the so-called classic era in the late 18th and early 19th century for Beethoven. The very clever way he compares the styles, and I think I want to open up for those of you who have read it or thought about it. It does involve some kind of understanding of musical form. So, for example, most symphonies, classical symphonies of Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, and others have 4 movements, right, in 4 parts. So those of you from the LA Phil crowd knows that, and they're usually a fast movement that begins sometimes with a slow introduction that's in a particular form called sonata form or sonata allegro form, and then it's a slow movement, more lyrical, and then a dance-like movement, which is a moderate tempo, and then a fast finale. So it's kind of, composers, I think, discovered a kind of psychological rhythm of maybe attention, that the first movement, when the audience's listener is fresh, it's a little more complicated, upbeat, complicated, has a particular scheme, and then you can relax and chill to a beautiful melody or variations, and then the tempo is picked up more based on a minuet, or when Beethoven speeded it up, it was called a scherzo, and then a happy ending. Sorry. Scam likely. And so one sort of needs to understand this article, because of the way he describes the composers, I think, is really interesting. So Haydn as a supreme lyrical composer, and Beethoven as someone who constantly tried to break out of solitude, right? And Mozart as a dramatic composer. So interesting to think of those categories of and in relationship to the 4 movements. And particularly, I mean, this is a very kind of, so I would suggest that if you read something like this and you don't have a musical background, that it might be an incentive to dig a little deeper and find out what he's referring to, and then to listen to yourself to see whether those labels are, those categories are useful. Particularly when he says about Haydn, his whole musical concept is lyrical. For this reason, he is at his best in the non-lyrical movements. Whoa. Okay. What does he mean? Why that? And so, of course, because he has to adapt his lyricism then to the non-lyrical structure of it. Right? And then he says, Haydn wrote music like an old bachelor, which he almost was. Well, I mean, apparently he had a wife who was very bitchy, but that's only from his account. The other side, I don't think she wrote, but she might say her husband was a pain in the ass. But anyway, he was almost an old bachelor. A self-contained and self-sufficient lyricism is the dominant characteristic, and avuncular generosity its chief means of contact with the listener. So, these are things to be tested against your own experience. How would you describe it? Of course, as a composer and a critic, he's vast experience of knowing many Haydn symphonies, knowing the structure. But nevertheless, I think that the writing is evocative enough for you to listen to Haydn. And then Beethoven. Well, we know, everyone knows the Fifth Symphony. Right? I'm sure that da 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 dum, pa 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 bum. right? The famous fate motive. And Beethoven, because he was so difficult, right? And so really, and so so sick most of his life. He had trouble, not even with the deafness, and then losing his hearing after about 1802 or so, gradually. This sense of solitude, and the music, he says, he's constantly trying to break out of solitude, and therefore, it's in his finales that where he resolves something, which is joy, actually. And the Ninth Symphony, of course, as you know, is the Ode to Joy, where he says it explicitly. And then Mozart, Mozart. Solitude was unknown to Mozart. He was always around someone, right? Except at the time when his mother died, when he was traveling as a child in Paris. And how that sense of drama, his music is full of dramatic animation. His themes are like people. His developments are working out their contrasting nature, and so forth. So he works that into the movements. In fact, one of my friends who we'll talk about in a little bit, studied at Yale and piano, and his teacher said, you can't understand the piano concertos because they're really operas with instruments. He wrote 27 of them, which is unheard of, on a composer. And he, the reason he did that is because in Vienna, the theaters were closed during Lent and Advent. So all the theaters were closed, but concerts were allowed. So that's when he wrote his piano concertos, right? And so if you hear them as characters, and you can hear them in Figaro and so forth. Anyway, the point is that this writing it gives a big picture and gives you something to test out, to explore, and it's evocative enough to do it. So I don't know if anyone has any comments on Virgil's piece. It's kind of gutsy to write on the great composers, the icon, and to actually say, well, Beethoven's slow movements are like treading water. It's not really a compliment, is it? Or Mozart. Pardon me?
I enjoyed finding out, or just evaluating the difference between their lives and how that affected their music. I always like to know the artist who has created my work, or if you know the author who's written something, it gives it a more personal touch. And I found that fascinating.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. I guess there's a lag here.
It's funny, I responded to that as well, but like, why? I'm always shocked by that. And it's more and more and more these days as we have more access to artists. And I find it interesting that like what we're doing to pop artists is we have to know who they are. And now we're looking backwards towards classical artists and saying, we want to know who they are too. It's like why do we need to impose, why does this thirst for personal backstory and psychological analysis of the people through their music? I mean, why is the music not enough? Or are we so uncomfortable with how the music makes us look at ourselves? I'm not saying this about anybody, but sometimes I think music is, to me, an experience to open up something in me, and then looking at the artist can be a deflection of that, maybe, at times. So I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's one of the curses of academia, in fact. Like, what is it to understand? Or what is it to know? What is it to know a piece or know a person? There are all these levels of doing that. I know somebody because I recognize them, or because they were in my class, or because we went to school together. We've been friends for 50 years, or because I live with a person. And what I want to encourage you to do is to put that down. That burden of having to understand the music, right? And if it touches you in a way that, well, I think there's so much in that Swafford piece. a person's life, we all come into this world and leave it in the same way, right? And the rest is infinite variety. But an artist's life has a certain trajectory, right? They're chosen maybe. And it's just, if that's, there's that tuning fork somehow, I think, in our hearts or in our chest. And when we hear a piece of music or read something or experience something, it's like, yes, it resonates. And that will allow you to go deeper in a way.
Lance, if I can respond to what Joanne said a second ago. So I had this, something that I was struggling with years ago or thinking about, and that was that you can look at these paintings by Picasso where there are women crying and stuff like that in the painting, and then you read the story, and the story is that he would orchestrate for his wife and his lover to meet at the studio at the same time so that they would get in a fight. And that became the fodder or the inspiration for the painting. And what I was thinking about is that I'd be having these conversations with people saying, well, the painting on its own is beautiful, right? I mean, like, I admire it. I like it. I think it's really, really good. But then you read the story and you think, God, this guy is a complete creep, right? So then some people would say, I don't want to like the painting because he was a creep. But then there's a quote in Nietzsche in The Birth of Tragedy, and it's very puzzling line, but basically he says, art chooses artists for itself. So I mean, one way to read that would be something like, there's something happening in the world called art, capital A, and it uses artists to express what is happening. And so the artist makes more than they maybe even intend. So then in a way, biography, part of me is in a way not that interested in biography, although it clearly informs, which is what I thought your point was. You understand, oh, there was solitude or lack of solitude, and then they're responding in that way. But then I might be like Licity in this sense. I kind of just want to have the piece that has its own life. At least that's my own feeling.
Can I respond to that, Andy?
Yeah, please.
And give a little spin on that.
Yeah.
I'm a big person of always wanting to know the biography around art pieces and artists. And certainly there's the internal emotional response. But when I find out that that piece was written when World War I started out, or written between the Civil War, and now it's an old man and we're at the advent of World War I, or regionally, like he writes the whole thing about Concord, Massachusetts, and the Alcotts and Thoreau and the Transcendentalists. So there's a zeitgeist or a response to your particular time in history, geography, philosophy of that time, whether you're pro or against. So I guess maybe there's an argument for experiencing the piece pretty profoundly without that knowledge first and letting it wash over you, and then taking the breadcrumbs to place that artist in time. But for my money, it gives me epiphany after epiphany after epiphany to know the biographical.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Yeah, for sure.
You've been lucky then, Miranda. Because you can have like the experience Andy is talking about, or like there was some pop star talked about a song that I really liked, and he said, "Oh, this song is about my cat," and I'm like, thanks for ruining the freaking song.
Exactly.
And it's like, but so I think what's interesting about music, and something you said, Lance, brought this straight to mind, which was like, how do we describe magic? That's really like a piece of this. Like when Andy's talking about like art exists and it plucks us and it's like, here, spit this out your mouth, and then it's like, okay, that's magic. And so I think, what Miranda's saying, it's like, can we find a way to, and I think art is the only thing that can challenge us to do this, to let all these ways within us coexist. The intellectual experience, the emotional experience, the inexplicable magic of it all, and to not settle on there's one way. Can we not be the person that walks into the art gallery and sees a piece of abstract art and goes, it's a sailboat, like, can we find, that's always I was a visual artist for like years, like, oh, it's a sailboat. I heard so many people say that about works of art. They were always sailboats. But like, what, like, is this a way to challenge us to just be like, freak, there is no one way, you know?
Can I continue on what you are saying? Is that we are not living in a vacuum. I mean, life has a context, and this context is at the same time spatial and temporal. This is what everybody was talking about before. And I think for everything that you create, it doesn't matter if it is art or engineering or architecture, there is always two things that you think about. Is that, am I done? Or should I continue to work on this? Am I done, right? And the other one is, did I really express everything I wanted into that piece? Or did I miss something? So these two concepts are always in everything that you do, maybe unconscious, but very conscious. Myself as an engineer, I had always these two thoughts that, when should I stop designing? That it is good enough. Ship it, sell it.
Yeah, get
rid of it. And it's the same. Yeah.
That's, Pierre Picasso would say something very similar. He would say something like, I know I'm done when I don't want to tweak it anymore, but you keep having this feeling like, oh, I want to keep, like nudging around the edges, keep making it a little bit better. But usually you have a timeline, right? In other words, unless you're just creating for your own pleasure or your own interests, you kind of say, I made a promise to somebody to have it done by a certain time, and you make a kind of a compromise if that's design or whatever it is. And that's usually stops it, even if you don't feel done, I guess.
I'm going to give, you had suggested on your paper, Lance, to have a quote, and I do have a Stephen Sondheim quote about art being an attempt to make form around chaos. But there was another one, and so I'm going to paraphrase Sondheim badly, but he's basically saying musicals are not written. Musicals are rewritten. In other words, rewrite after rewrite after rewrite after rewrite. So, yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to interject there that there's a book by James Cars that I'm sure Andy knows called Finite and Infinite Games, which is a little book of philosophy, right? And there are two kinds of games. One is finite, and the other is infinite. And finite, the purpose is to win, so it has a beginning, middle, and an end, winners and losers. And the infinite game, the object is to keep playing. And I think it's probably maybe part of the personality. So Ives's works, of course, a lot of them weren't performed right away because he lived in anonymity practically, writing. But there are 14 authoritative versions of the Concord Sonata that every time he picked it up, he changed something. So, I mean, there's the original manuscript, and then the thing that he sent to the publisher, and then the proofs, and then he just couldn't stop. So people call it like an open-ended piece. But of course, engineers, if you have to deliver something or have the building built, you've got to make some tough decisions about that. But good. I think that I wanted to throw in Kyle Gann's piece on No More Heroes as well, because it linked into Haydn, right? And saying that basically Haydn was an experimental composer because he did this crazy stuff. Right, and Kyle Gann is actually another composer. He's at Bard College, and he was also a music critic of the Village Voice from about 1985 to 1995, or the end of the 90s, and a great writer. I've had him here at the University of Kentucky as a guest. So he's writing for the Village Voice and writing about music downtown. That there was this kind of division of Manhattan, downtown, Greenwich Village, Soho, beatniks, kind of loose bohemian culture, Midtown, Carnegie Hall, Metropolitan Opera, Lincoln Center, all the museum kind of musical venues, right? And Metropolitan Museum of Art. And then uptown, which includes Harlem, but also includes the Columbia, where people were writing academic music that no one wanted to listen to. So you had this There's academic music, which was fiercely difficult and only for a few. The great classics, the museums of concert halls, and then this kind of loose stuff that was happening downtown, postmodern stuff. And so he writes in a very kind of, humorous and light way. Like, there's no PDQ Haydn, because Peter Schickele couldn't have beat Haydn at his own game. In other words, Haydn is playing so many tricks, you didn't need to spoof him. He was spoofing himself. Right? Although he says it's really hard to hear that now because, Haydn wrote maybe 109 symphonies, 104 in number. And they sound sort of alike because he uses the same orchestra, but no two are really alike. This is font of creativity because he was always playing, he was always experimenting. And it's interesting too, I put this in there because it kind of ties through to contemporary music. Musical shock is a drug. And then he goes on about, modernism, that you need more of it. You need more shock, you need more dissonance, you need more of this or that, to the point where it's all been done, right? Until that collapses into postmodernism and then other styles. But I think that piece is No More Heroes is a good bit of writing about that transition between modernism and the current scene. So I don't know if there's any reactions to that particular.
Yeah, Lance, if I could ask you, that piece that the line you just read, I had circled, as with most drugs, the system gets used to it and you have to increase the dosage to keep reaching the same level of pleasure. And then at the bottom of that page, but a system can take only so much of a drug, and past a certain maximum, there is no longer any way to increase the dosage. Rocks had a hell of a time trying to match the original shock, which was so explosive it rang for 20 years. Rap has upped the ante only by resorting to the extra musical obscenities and politically incorrect sentiments. And so my note there on that one piece, which I love the writing, was something like, I go to the music festival in Ojai, and sometimes I feel like you're just trying to shock me by, having notes that I've never heard together before, or, some kind of expression or chord change that sounds so dissonant in my ear. And I wonder, I don't know the answer to this. I'm positing it as a question, is it shock value? I don't know the answer to that. Sometimes it feels like it's shock.
I feel the same way at the festival sometimes, that is this noise or music? But it's almost like eat your vegetables, they're good for you. Expand your thinking, open up to something new. And then when Mozart comes around the next night, you can go, and just relax into it.
Well, I would say it's definitely music, but I'm again, I'm trying to make, I guess, a kind of a value statement about it in some way, but maybe that's inapt. I'm not sure. Sorry, Lance, go ahead.
I think that's very valid. And if you think back to the 2019 festival, I know some of you were there, Barbara Hannigan's festival, that she included a Haydn symphony in with all that far out stuff, which was really brilliant because he was doing crazy things, experimenting back then. And that notion that can be, you can hear Haydn afresh, particularly in the middle of a new music festival.
Yeah.
But Henry Cowell was one of the first who played inside the piano. I ran out of time to go home. I have my grand piano at home. I could have demonstrated some of this, but you can smash your hands down on the keyboard or play inside and get some really cool sounds out of it. But they very quickly become cliches, And so the challenge to composers, art composers, is to say, is it a way that I can use this sound in a structured way that's compelling and not just, the same old stuff, And that's, I think it's an edge for a composer to do it. It's not a happy profession, I guess, because there's so many choices and so forth. But anyway, I think Kyle Gann has a book called Music Downtown, which is University of California Press. It's his collective reviews from the Village Voice, and they're fabulous. He's very perceptive, and he writes in a way that he's using, in the Haydn Symphony, he's talking about development section and things like that, but he's basically writing for people who are not specialists. And I wanted to mention Anthony Tomasini from the New York. He's the chief music critic of the New York Times since 2000, and he's been one of my closest friends since 1967, or 67, I think. Yeah, he was still in high school, and I think I was a freshman at Brown, and we met and started a conversation that still goes on. And Tony, I wanted to include Tony here because he's a very influential critic, but he was also a mentee of Virgil Thompson. So interesting. Tony taught at Emerson College and for some bizarre reason didn't get tenure, which was the best thing that ever happened to him because he started to write music criticism for the Globe, and then started writing for the Times and worked his way up to chief critic. So I wrote and said, Tony, I'm going to do this thing for the Agora Foundation, and and he said, well, this is the conversation we've had for 50 years. Like, how do you talk about? Well, what pieces should I use? He has thousands of reviews. And he said, well, why don't you, and he sent me a list of things. Why don't you include the one on Andrew Norman? Because it's most like Virgil. It's most trying to write a playful and descriptive review of this piece. But what he said also was, what was a game changer, and this is pretty remarkable in the Times, that he can include links now, right? So he can say Andrew Norman's got this incredibly uplifting style, that you can hear in Split or in Play or other these, and then you can either click on the link or you can find it on YouTube. So you can actually use it to, compare your experience with it with someone who's greatly has tremendous amount of experience. And I thought it was really interesting when Tony says in the end that this piece, like some of these others, is so upbeat. I mean, it's just relentless. It's exuberant, bonkers, interesting, playful, and he says at the end, is this now Mr. Norman? He's only 36 years old, I guess, Norman. Is this now Mr. Norman's style? Can he stick to an approach that results in such intentionally fragmented pieces, however riveting? Maybe, just to try it, he should compose an adagio for strings. Many of you would know Barber's Adagio for strings. So then I was looking at the next link that I had for you, which was 5 minutes that will help you love 21st century music. I'll be damned if there isn't a piece by Andrew Norman, which he wrote after this review, called Sustain, which sounds, I mean, it's not Adagio for strings, but it's very muted, subtle for strings. It's as if Tony gave, I could imagine Andrew Norman reading the article and go, oh, yeah, well, I could do that. I don't know if that was a direct causal link, but Tony was, to talk about influences, Tony had heard about this musical that was happening in the Village called Rent. And it was in rehearsal. And so he went down, he asked if he could come to the dress rehearsal, and he had a 90-minute interview with Jonathan Larson, the composer of it. And Rent went on to be, is a remake of, a retread of Bohème with contemporary music, of course, maybe you know it. He went back after the interview, put a kettle on to have some tea, and had an aneurysm and died at 35 years old. Jonathan Larson. And Tony wrote this piece in the Times to say, there's this great piece. And I said, Tony, I mean, you kind of discovered that, and it was interesting that he because he wrote the piece in the Times, I don't think because of Jonathan died that soon, but he called attention to it, and it made its way. He won a Tony, I guess, for it, and Tony had the tape of the interview. You know, his parent, he got to be friends with his parents, and they said, you know, we're so proud of Jonathan that he's gotten all this credit, but you know, we want our Jonathan back. You know, but we're very grateful to that. So I did want to, I included that link to 5 minutes that would make you love 21st century music, because it's a feature in the Times that's really wonderful. You know, it's really, they ask about from 12 to 14 people, not all musicians, of course, you know, artists, poets, people who love music, ex-music lovers. So Adriana Leah, you'd be pleased to know that yesterday, the piece was 5 minutes that will help you love sopranos. So
great news.
Barbara Hannigan is in there, you know, and so as people say, what's your favorite piece for sopranos? Or, you know, what would you do to introduce someone to, you know, who didn't like opera or something to opera, or people who don't like 20th century music or contemporary music? So here are 14 pieces, excerpts that are really extraordinary, I think. You know, and for people that think that contemporary music is just dissonant and impenetrable, and you cannot, you know, like some of the pieces that show up at Ojai, but it's not. You know, it's a vast universe of pieces and styles, and it's a playground in which I invite you to go play and to listen to those excerpts. And of course, and if you like one of them, I discovered 2 African American composers in that list that I didn't know of. And so I guess it's maybe like having a party, which I thought, you know, I have in pre or post COVID times, to have a few friends over and say, hey, bring your favorite piece. What are you listening to now? And everyone would play a little bit. We'll have a party and listen to what you're listening to. You know, that's sort of in that vein. So I don't know if any of you have any comments on that. I've had a chance to play with that, but it's a really good, boredom it doesn't seem to be a possibility with all these interesting things to listen to and explore. And yet,
I did have one tiny thing to notice when I think it was when I went on Symphony number 4. And just to tell you thank you, because I am loving Charles Ives now. I can't believe I haven't lived with this my whole life, and I don't have the words to exactly say why, but I did read the threads, and I noticed about 5 or 6 comments down, someone said, kind of like, help me. And a nice YouTuber went, well, just imagining you're walking through a fair, the fairgrounds. And the guy goes, oh my God, thank you so much. That's all that was needed, just that little bone to go, the little band's over there and the cotton candy over there and the little children noises are over there. That was it. That was the bone. So, you know, that was, I was very moved by that. That was, I kind of gleaned from these articles you sent us and everything that kind of the idea, I like that you said, Pierre, about spatial and temporal, you know, and then I'm here at the dance studio, so everybody was tortured for the last couple of days with Charles Ives, you know, and I go, imagine you're all the way at the end of 2,400 square feet in the other studio B, and you're playing a piccolo, and I'm going to walk back from you and see what that sounds like spatially that far away. You know, I was like, we were doing all kinds of crazy things like that. And that's why I'm saying, even listening to him and coming through the wall, the bachata guys in there, you know, and having those sounds, and normally, you know, but I was like, oh, well, maybe I should just embrace that as a more contemporary layer to Charles Ives. So he's going to add some bachata because it's in the environment. So, but I did think that little bone of explanation to the YouTubers that you could see right away, that was enough of an in to be able to now open up more Charles Ives.
Yeah, it's a reorientation. Jim. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I have a question. The aphorism, don't pay too much attention to the sounds, for if you do, you might miss the music.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then Leon Russell, listen to the melody, for my love is in their hiding. How do we interpret that? I mean, it goes on to say that you might miss the spirit of the times that's captured in the music. What's your interpretation of that? And can you give us a few examples?
Sure. I was going to. Can we hold off on that a minute?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, yeah. That is a crux, because don't pay what it. However you define music, really, sound is pretty much a fundamental.
Oh, I'm excited. It's really, really intuitive. I've been thinking about it all morning.
Yeah, good.
That's why I asked.
I wanted to just to follow up to close that first part with Alex Ross. If you're interested in brilliant writing about music, read Alex Ross in the New Yorker. He's the New Yorker music critic since 1996, I think, and a good friend of Tony's. And Tony says, I really admire Alex because, well, he's a brilliant writer, but he doesn't write the next day. So many music critics are writing the next day or the day after of a concert, so that it's written quickly. It's a kind of skill of being able to write quickly, but sometimes it can be ring a little bit of cliches or formulaic. Whereas Alex can craft, he doesn't have a deadline so much. He can spend a couple of weeks on an article. And so there are dozens, scores of his pieces that would have sufficed as good writing about music. But I chose this one, wasn't quite arbitrary, on Meredith Monk. And let me, let's see if I can share my screen here. I want to show you a little, before we talk about it. Okay. I wanted this one. These are excerpts of it. And so forth.
Wow.
What I recommend for my students actually is to listen or experience a piece first before you read about it. then read about it, and then listen or see it again. You know, that's a powerful way of doing it. So you're not prejudiced from the start what you think you're supposed to hear, or you're not layering interpretations on it before you hear it, somebody else's ideas, you know. And so I think this is a significant review of Alex. It's from 2015, and the recording is from 18, I think. So it wasn't available when he wrote he was just reviewing the performance and saying there is some kind of shape to the chaos of styles in the 20th century, and that he's saying that the heyday of the singer-composer, a figure at once dominated classical music and then but disappeared, has reemerged. I like the sense, you know, that composers are writing for other people. The composer was to fall silent, to be ventriloquialized by others. And then he lists a number of women who are songwriters or composers, including Laurie Anderson. You've seen John LaBarbera, Diamanda Gallis, and so forth. And then they have in common a tendency to use their own voices not merely as lead instruments, but as structuring principles. No matter how intricate the composition, it wells up from the body at the center of the stage. Significantly, this is the first classical genre to be dominated by women. When women employ their own voices as vessels for musical thought, they are amending history. It's really powerful stuff, I think. You know, and I've been a fan of Meredith Monk for many years. You know, I don't know if she's new to some of you. Most of her pieces are without text, so he describes it as oblique. Here's a wonderful passage. These compositions, which are generally nonverbal, extract every imaginable color and timbre from the human voice. Monk once described the end result as, quote, folk music from another planet. Now, if that's not evocative, I'd like to hear folk music from another planet, wouldn't you? Like, and he uses the word luminous. I kept thinking of Appalachian Spring, Aaron Copland's luminous score, Martha Graham's Life Dances. Monk similarly generates a sense of wide open space, an arm extending gesture here, a vocal chirp or grunt there, and suddenly you were in a field at dusk. There is a rapturous sequence and so forth, right? That's interesting. Come back to Pierre's sense of temporal spatial, you know, that there's a quality to that, I think. And there's even a quality to Ross's writing, I think. That's like that. So I don't know if there's any comments. Miranda, maybe you.
Yeah, I was interested when we started out, we're talking about mind and heart applying. And now watching this and actually hearing you say the word body, I'm a choreographer. I do a lot of biopics. I did the Judy Garland miniseries, okay? It's all human gesture. I did so many biopics. How does Selena move differently than Judy Garland? So when you see that clip you just gave us, when she's bending over and it's from the diaphragm and she's just bending, or you see the heart thing or the cradle thing, or was that a bird, or that appeal and all of that. If we had turned the sound off and watched that same piece, that's the language of my world. She is talking a storm with human gesture. So it's very interesting to me, you know, to study and watch all human beings in relationship. Like, Eric, you're closer to the camera, lucidity, not so much. This one sitting here like this. If you turn all the sound down and spend a month just translating human beings from gesture and in relationships of how they are with each other, that becomes very interesting addition to that sound. And, you know, which came first, the chicken or the egg of all these elements.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I just had to give my voice for that language that's so evident in that piece.
Yeah, thank you. And Candy and my wife Lourdes are actually, as linguists and linguistic anthropologists, are really into gesture as well, studying gesture and touch, haptic relationships. I don't know, Candy, if you want to comment on any of that.
No, I think that was a fascinating statement. And a lot of people talk about the coevolution of gesture and speech. So it's just my comment, but the importance of all the modalities integrated for human understanding and creativity.
And your latest book, what is the title that you wrote with Asta? What's the title of it?
Oh, embodied family choreography.
Yeah. It sounds like you and Miranda should have a conversation. Right?
And I'm sorry, embodied what?
Embodied family choreography.
Family choreography.
Embodied family and choreography?
No,
or
embodied family choreography.
Choreography.
Yeah.
Now, when you guys came on board, when I heard that you were a linguistic anthropologist, I was like, what is that field? I got to find out. Fascinating. And in linguistics, obviously you're telling me that it includes gesture. Does that include sound and music as well? Is it the whole pie?
Yes, everything in a very integrated way. I think the only way that you can understand human communication is through multiple sensory modalities simultaneously involved and working together. It's really critical.
Yeah. Ooh.
Multimodality is a term I hear quite a bit from Lourdes. I don't know, Lou, are you in earshot?
And also sensoriality is something that we try to get into.
Yeah, wonderful. Adriana Leah, see.
Yeah, it's impossible and practically unavoidable not to think about the gestures, the conventions of gestures of the beginnings of the opera, based on the Greek dramas, and those conventions about certain positions of the body, trying to precisely convey emotions, you know. So just about by the reading and by the gesture, they just were able to empower, you know, the message. And then obviously it was complemented in opera, especially that was just the upbringing of the opera, that sensation that it could be empowered, the music. But it's how interesting is that when you have to go and interpret this type of music, early music, what we call early music, that is it precisely is what this author is talking about, you know, about Caccini and about Peri, Giacomo Peri. Those are the considered the founders, you know, of the opera. Is how important it was for them when you are trying to perform this type of music. You really have to learn about some certain conventions with gesture. It is not that you just do whatever. I mean, they were so serious about conveying the message that they really needed the gesture as well. Yeah. As a convention, it is very powerful. I think it just calls for what you are just about talking about, Miranda, about the power of gesture in combination with, of course, with the sound itself and the inflection of the sound for the anthropologists, linguistics. So it is unbelievable how that it was important. It wasn't about just the music with the dance and you know, and the voice and the music and everything, but also the gesture. There were certain specific conventions. And if you are going to perform professionally, you know, that type of music is something that you must learn. It's part of the curricula. So it just calls my attention how everything is so interrelated. Just thinking about this performer Monk, even though she is not articulating and uttering, you know, words, is how these gestures and these things are so powerful that they just convey all this emotion plus the music. So it is very interesting.
Thank you. Well, I interject that Adriana was the lead role in Monteverdi's last opera, Popea, and a few years ago. So she's had experience in that. And just as a footnote, maybe you know, Miranda, that the Russian 19th century philosophers and theorists that thought that ballet was the Gesamtkunstwerk, it was the complete artwork, that ballet, because it was based on music and gesture and movement, was superior to opera because it didn't have words to get in the way. It's quite interesting.
I think there's a good argument in what Adriana and some of the other folks are saying, when that contextualization is very important to your ability to appreciate the piece. You alluded earlier to Haydn and his innovation and his I would say almost his jokiness in some instances, and I think a real value of the concert hall is that you go into this space and you have an opportunity to drain your brain of the centuries that have succeeded since Haydn and get back into his time period, and the jokes are there still, the shock is still there, but you have to eradicate the 20th and 21st century, well, and the 19th, most of the 19th. So I think that can be done, but it requires that contextualization. Also, you know, in appreciating the symphony, you did a very nice job, I thought, of breaking out the typical 4-movement symphony, and knowing where that's going can help you appreciate it. So I think that's, and I think it's part of why we're all here today. Is we're broadening our sense of context.
Yeah, I think someone told me that, you know, that when before cable, I guess, that the main networks, evening programming had a kind of template based on people's attention, you know, ending with Johnny Carson or The Tonight Show or
Lawrence Welk.
Pardon me?
I agree with you
Lawrence
about,
Oh.
sorry. I agree with you about wanting to experience it first without the foreknowledge and just emotionally, because I'm one of those who doesn't have the vocabulary for wine either. And then read about it and find more and make those connections. When I read the article about the monk piece, I was very curious, but I didn't have time to look it up. But having read first and then seeing it added a different dimension that I don't know if I would have gotten the first time. So I guess the rules are there are no rules.
Yeah, or to realize that, you know, there's we all have head and hearts, although some hearts are pretty walled off, as we know, the people that can't feel empathy. But you know, they're both operating, you know, and they're like Bach's music, for example, is meticulously done. You know, it's the way it's structured, it works out mathematically beautifully, but it also, through the chord progressions, you know, he's got a hook in your heart. I mean, he just knows the human heart. So it's sort of like has both of those. But I'd like to move on, and we get back to Jim's question, to Swafford's writing and to Ives. I actually, what I, maybe it's not necessary, but when I give a class in Ives, I play this trick, which is to play a few pieces and ask them, what do these pieces have in common? That's the first one. Here's the second one. It's also a song, and here's the third one. This you know already. Where did we go? Then this is the fourth one. Let me get back there. So anyway, the trick is, that people go, wow, those pieces don't have anything. It was a German art song, then this crazy piece with banging on the piano, and then this beautiful lyrical string section of an orchestra, and then the crazy thing with Yankee Doodle in it. And what do they have in common? They're by the same composer.
Right. Yep.
High note soprano.
It's kind of shocking.
The other thing they have in common is the listener.
True.
And I think we forget that. We talk about the backstory of the composer, but we each bring our own backstory to everything we hear as well.
I wanted to, let's see, if I share the screen, would this come up? Share screen. It's Acrobat, yeah. This is a little outline of Ives's career, and some of you know this obviously, but it wasn't clear from the right. You could pull some of this out of it. Born in Danbury, Connecticut, was a church organist. If you've looked through this, then you know, right? And then the amazing thing about Ives is that in his youth, he grew up in a vernacular culture, that is popular music, because his father was a bandmaster, and he played the organ. He was the youngest paid organist in the state of Connecticut at age 12. So he was steeped in popular music of the day as well as church music. He managed to go to Yale when he was 20, played on the baseball team, but he studied with one of the most famous American composers of the time, Horatio Parker. So he learned European art music, right? Art songs. That's why did he write a German song? Well, that was part of his assignments at Yale. Why would they write a German song? Well, of course, everything the Germans did, or the great music, was from Germany and Europe. So it was imitative. And then, but he had from early on this bad boy streak of wanting to experiment based on some of his father's experiments, as you saw. And so he actually was, I think, one of the only composers in Western history, American history, that mastered 4 traditions. That is popular music, or what's called vernacular music, church music, sacred music, classical music, art music, and experimental music. And as Swafford pointed out beautifully in that chapter, that his life work was leading towards some way that he could integrate those into one big kind of overall style, or a way of an inclusiveness that included all of that. So what I wanted to do is, in talking about why is Jan Swafford's writing is so wonderful. It's a biography. His first big biography was of Ives, the one I've excerpted, and you pick it up and it just can't put it down. It's a page turner, I think. It's just, so sorry just to give you so few pages, but I'd like to. I would like to try something if my 3 friends will join me, and if I can find the Ives folder. So I think I included this, but I think it would be nice to hear this read aloud. This is page 1 of the biography, the prelude, the first paragraph, and we're going to read it alternately. Are you ready? Yeah.
Yep.
And the rest of you, if you like to close your eyes or just imagine, well, just be absorbed in what you're hearing. In the old Ives house in the middle of Danbury, Connecticut, in 1874,
among the warren of rooms smelling of beeswax and fruit,
these sounds we're familiar.
The intimate patter of rain,
the measureless pealing of thunder,
the jingle of sleighs in winter,
the chirr of spring peepers from the streams and ponds,
The clatter and clop of buggies down dusty Main Street,
and the deep rolling rumble of wagons on their way to shops and factories.
From the congregational church next door, muffled sounds of choir and organ.
and the great bronze booming of the bells.
and all day Sunday, the sound of distant bells.
Like intimations of a presence beyond the horizon.
Of this moment, of this life.
At holidays, the brass bands marching past.
The rattle and clump of fireworks.
Clang of the fire bell.
In the summer, the cries of icemen and boys selling newspapers.
Inside the house, the groaning of old floors.
The antiphonal voices of a big family's coming and going.
Every day, the bright rising and falling of music.
Cornet or piano.
Or violin or bands.
Or little orchestras.
Playing in the parlor or outside.
In the shed or in the barn.
Playing quick steps and hymns.
And Beethoven and Stephen Foster.
So with that first paragraph, it's a kind of signals you're in for a ride. It's an attempt, or well, to imagine, evoke the sounds of rural Connecticut in 1874. You know, the sounds that a newborn was immersed in, and that would be part of his whole life. You know, and that one of the reasons that that I think Swafford's writing in general is so remarkable is because it doesn't leave out the sensuous. It somehow focuses on that. And if you, I would recommend the biography because the prelude is so fascinating. Jan was my guest 4 years ago here. We have a lecture series. His next biography was of Brahms and then another one of Beethoven. They're all really extraordinary. Jan Swafford is a composer. And in 3 weeks, his biography of Mozart will be coming out. December 8th is the publication date. And he told me how he writes them. Of course, he reads everything that the composer wrote and much of, I guess, what's written about him. But he writes out by hand what the composer wrote, what Ives wrote in his diaries, in journals and letters. He writes them out until he hears a voice, until he gets the voice. And then he can start writing. So it's as if he wrote this from the inside out. Mm-hmm. So being a composer, you know, he has this experience, life experience of what it's like to be chosen, for music to choose him, right? To art to choose him, to spend a life as a composer. Let me admit, Carrie got knocked out here. And so he, in the preface, he shares with us his journey with Ives, of how this connection I guess he had with him, and how he spent 7 years with him. That is 7 years in writing the biography, and it feels very much like it's an inside job, right? And I think that's one of the hallmarks of good writing, not just about music, but for musical writing, it's as if he's writing from inside the music somehow. So beginning from that sensuous experience. So this, I don't know, it's just, to me, it's just remarkable and luminous, the writing. A life has a shape, a form, the beginning, the end, the same for everyone, the rest of infinite variety. And then the calling of an artist And and so he, I don't know if this involves some technical knowledge, but Jan said he doesn't write these biographies for scholars. He writes them for musicians and music lovers, so that they're more accessible. You know, there is some specialized language, particularly in description of the Fourth Symphony, but this Enter Act One, the music of the ages, I think is accessible. But I'd be interested in hearing your opinions on it. But when I read this line, so he takes melody, harmony, counterpoint, space, programs in these categories, and then I'll get to your question, Jim, about this. But the effect that hymn tunes, in particular, or popular tunes, had on Ives as a child, which he never went stayed a deep connection with him to his place and to his family and to his community. He would not separate the music on the page from the way people sang or played it. Even the coarseness of amateur performance seemed to Ives a sign of authenticity. The mistakes were part of the music. Sometimes the mistakes were the music of the ages. Humble melodies lay in his memory like icons, illuminated by the halo of spirit and emotion townsfolks had bestowed on them. I mean, that is such, to me, imagine tunes or some aspect of your memory lying inside you or in your memory like icons, you know, that like beacons that were illuminated. And I think even to know that, even if you didn't know, I feel having bad for my international students, particularly Chinese students or Korean students who don't know Yankee Doodle or My Old Kentucky Home, and they don't get the reference, you know. And at least we know that to what they refer, you know, and even if they're not, if the tune itself doesn't give us goosebumps. But I'd like to hear some of your responses to this writing. And
there's a real humility, I think, what was the word you just used? Accessibility, but I think it's really a humility. There's no ego, right? I mean, I think sometimes, and I'm sure that all of us who go to the Ojai Festival feel this. I mean, if you just listen to the conversations of people passing by after a performance, there's a sense of proving themselves by what they say about it, which is usually adds to the level of critique and disdain, which I always just want to shake them and just be like, just feel it. But the humbleness, the humility with which, you know, he's approaching this music so that other people can feel it too. You know, it's really generous. And I think that is so courageous in a world where we are, you know, where there's almost like, you know, you brought up finite and infinite games, which is by my bedside all the time. There's no desire to win here. There's just a desire to continue to bring more people into this game that he loves playing and enjoying. And I just think that takes a lot of courage in a world designed to win. It's beautiful.
Yeah, he's remarkable. Remember Candy when he gave I met him before he came to Kentucky. I went out to LA and with Candy and Chuck, went to the LA Phil was doing a Beethoven cycle, and he gave the pre-concert talks there. Yeah.
Well, I had this little personal anecdote. It's on page 94, and it's the excerpt under experimentation, the actually quoted piece. I'll read the passage and I'll tell you why it resonated with me. My father had a weakness for quarter tones. In fact, he didn't stop even with them. He rigged up the contrivance to stretch 24 or more violin strings and tune them up to suit the dictates of his own curiosity. He would pick out quarter tone tunes and try to get the family to sing them, but I remember he gave that up except as a means of punishment. And the reason why it made me crack up is because I have some Turkish instruments that have movable frets. And I took out all the quarter tones because they all sound wrong to me. It just sounds like I'm sharp or flat on everything. So I basically turned it into a guitar, more or less. Anyway, I liked hearing that. I liked reading that.
Quarter tones are an acquired taste, I think.
I know. And my Turkish friends tell me I'm missing the boat, but
I agree with them.
Friend who lived in India, and she couldn't bear Indian music when she moved, and then she came to just love it.
Yeah.
With, being immersed in. But to get that ties into Jim's question, you know, like don't pay too much attention to the sound, for if you do, you'll miss the music. Now, what is music in that sense? I mean, music of the spheres or music of the ages, and the story comes. I don't think it's fully excerpted in there, but John Bell was the stonemason in Danbury, and when they had town meetings and like a campfire and singing around the fire, he would sing out of tune and bellow out loud, and one nice person, nice for Ives was a pejorative, right? Meaning that highly educated and disconnected from the heart. One nice fellow asked her father, "How could you stand to hear old John Bell sing?" Ives said, "Why, he's a superb musician." And the nice fellow said, "Well, he sings out of tune, you know, and he bellows. It's horrible." And then his father said, "Don't pay too much attention to the sounds. If you do, you'll miss the music." You know, and I'm sure the guy was baffled, but that what Ives and his father privileged or thought was important was the emotional connection, the felt sense of the music. And he described those, Ives described it as substance and manner. So manner is technical proficiency. So, you know, that you can study the piano and, for example, and play scales and play pieces perfectly, just as they're written, with a perfect technique and with a kind of distance, you know, that the fingers are doing the walking, you know, and playing, and somehow it's not connected. And other people who might play wrong notes and not have such a fancy technique, but your cheeks are wet with tears because it's so moving. So that, in Ives's terminology, that piece that moves you is got substance. We could say it's got soul or spirit or mojo, connection.
Like a gestalt where the sum is greater than the whole together, but there's something bigger than all the pieces.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe music is just the vehicle by which we can express our hearts, you know, and to do it with less than 100% of your being, to Ives was an affront, right? I mean, that it wasn't. He is a very complicated life. You know, he was a millionaire who made millions in the insurance business, so composed at night, on the weekends, and vacation. He was an amateur composer because his vision of music was so expansive and so challenging and broad that people, I mean, what sense could people make of that? You know, when he went to Yale, he brought with him a piece called "Song for Harvest Moon" that was with four instruments, and each one was in a different key. So it sounded like crap, I guess you could say. If you people didn't, they wrote in one key, right? They wrote in C major, or they wrote in one key, and he showed it to his teacher, and I'm sure his teacher went, "Is this a joke, Mr. Ives?" Because it is. It's not very funny, you know. And right away he gets the idea. Oh, okay, I've got to write these dinky little art songs because that's what they're doing. But in his heart was this really rollicking stuff. He embraced all of it.
Isn't it? I think it was Laura. I think Laura, you're the one who gave me this amazing quote, but this idea of like right notes and wrong notes. Like, I don't subscribe to that whatsoever. Like, is it a note? Like, did it make a sound? Then it is welcome in my world, you know. And Bonnie Raitt talks about when she goes to a slide, doesn't make all the way, she leaves it in because that's an emotional tension, you know. And I've had people say, like, how come you left all those flat notes in your, I'm like, because that was real. And Laura said to me, I think it was you, she said, you know, when did notes become a moral issue? You know, and it's like, wow, music is the place where we can leave all that convention behind and our imaginations have to come to music for us to be alive. You know, it demands our imagination, you know, and our imagination has to leave behind all those things that go, don't do that, like, so, you know, I love that piece of that idea that all the instruments were in 4 different keys. That sounds delightful. Not easy.
Well, your ears have, in Ives' language, have been stretched. They call it ear stretching. You know, that you can embrace those sounds. And in jazz, you know, they say if you play a wrong note, play it twice.
Yeah.
Well, that's Wofford. Wofford speaks to this. He says in the section on melody, the mistakes were part of the music.
Yeah.
Sometimes the mistakes were the music of the ages.
Yes. Yeah.
And Ravel in Bolero writes in different keys. That melody, it's in like because I've played it. The like second piccolo's in E major, first piccolo's in C major, second flute's in G major. We're all playing at the same time. And the first rehearsal, I stopped and I looked. She said, "You're right. Keep going." When you're in it, you just think, "Oh, I'm wrong." But the whole, like Jim said, the gestalt that goes out, the sound that is carried out is just multi-layered and so appreciated by the listener. But when you're in it, it's a different experience.
No, I don't understand G major, F major, any of that stuff. But when I went back and looked at the Fourth Symphony, the one that's from the BBC Palm, I watched, you know, I listened to it, I revisit, and then just this morning I went back and I looked at the different sections. There's the cellos, there's the violin, that piano player, there's the chorus, who's singing, who's not singing. And that was helpful to kind of educate myself with that visual. Also, we were talking about gesture, the conductor, right? And also the joy and there's a section, if you guys go back to it, I think it's a third in, maybe a half in, that a blonde woman who's part of the violin section, and you see them, and then the other section, and there's a moment where she just goes, oh, like she wells up with the joy, just also being a listener in that particular seat with the rest of it. It's just stunning. And it was really helpful to physically see it, to get a little education of the difference for my ear, you know, as well as the conductor. But do find that blonde violin player, because she can't help herself. She cannot help.
You know, when I was a kid, there was no YouTube and very little sheet music for guitars. So a song by like America, Ventura Highway, was just beyond, you know, comprehension ability. I mean, we could play various versions of it, but not too long ago, I saw on YouTube a video that is actually 4 different guitars playing different leads and melodies and tuned differently, all of them.
Yeah, they were beasts. They were amazing.
Yeah.
Well, the substance versus manner issue of technique and heart or commitment. There's a wonderful book that Tony recommended for me, actually, Tony Tomasini, called The Perfect Wrong Note by William Westney, I think his name is. And part of it is he gives a class called the Unmaster class. And basically the thrust of the book is it's better to play a wrong note beautifully or with feeling than it is to play all the right notes, you know, without that. And the problem with one of the things that recordings has done is create models of perfection. Because, you know, if you play a wrong note in a sound studio, they can fix that up fine, or your voice sounds not very good, you can be enhanced. So audiences then go to a concert and expect this kind of level of perfection. So you have to play, if you're going to play in public, there's all this pressure to play all the right notes. And Tony said to me, I'd rather listen to Murray Pariah when he plays wrong notes than Lang Lang or other, fancy big name pianists, because he's going for it, in a way. So I hope that with some of this reading and listening, I was going to play you must listen to Jenna William Booth Enters into Heaven if you haven't, because it's, yeah. Look at that gesture. Yeah, yeah, it's a knockout, right? The poetry is extraordinary, and it's in a form that Ives kind of created called cumulative form, which the hymn tune is intimated in the beginning, and it becomes gradually clear. It's not stated in its completion until the very end. So it's almost like that there's a form called theme and variations, which you have a theme and then a series of variations on it, but the theme is presented up front. And Ives did this, Stravinsky did this too, but Ives did it before him in a way of writing variations that lead to the theme. So it's like it being revealed. It's the full tune is being revealed to you. It's quite fascinating. And this is one of the things, I guess, about art in general, and in music in particular, but that there's a depth to it, or maybe not necessarily always complicated, but depth that allows it to be rediscovered, or new things to be discovered. Maybe
Nature hates analogy, or hates repetition, but loves analogy. Do we have that line in here somewhere?
Yes. Yeah.
What was that, Eric?
I think it's Wofford that says that I think is he quoting Ives, saying that nature,
yes,
nature hates repetition but loves analogy.
Hates repetition but loves.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
On page 100.
Yeah.
You can integrate analogy, and isn't that what art does? I mean, when he says, we're only a few pages in when we have that statement that music is life, and yet we're accustomed to thinking that, well, in what sense is art life? Isn't it distinct somehow? But what if it's more life than life because it integrates?
Interesting.
In a way that maybe doesn't always happen.
That's a wonderful contemplative question. The one I would say, it's what do you think about that? Or keep thinking about that. So when I began with that Philip Glass piece, I had shown people. We had talked about John Cage, and one of Kyle Gann wrote a whole book on 433, the famous silent piece. And a student of mine made an outline of the book, a summary and an outline, and he was killed in an automobile accident during Hurricane Sandy, I guess, which didn't come to Kentucky, but there was a flood, and a young guy, 28 years old, three-month-old baby, wife. So it was, I shared that with him. It's so poignant, that tragic. And then played that Philip Glass piece and said, these are the days. These are the days. And something magical happened. Talk about magic, which is why I couldn't talk about it anymore. I think there was a sense we were all so moved by it, not needing to figure it out or tell what style it is. So I wish for all of us I wish for the world to discover that kind of magic, that kind of non-duality, actually, that losing the separate sense of self into something bigger. Maybe that's the egolessness of Jan's writing, that he perceives in Ives, and that we can perceive in art, experience in art, that luminous quality. And then maybe we don't need words to describe what just happened, but just time.
I think people are having to jump off, Lance.
Yeah, well, I think that's a nice place to end.
Yep.
Go shine.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Really appreciate that.
Thank you. It's such a
He
privilege.
knows that there is something cool that's going to happen.
Anyway, have a great weekend, everyone. Stay safe.
Yeah.
And healthy.
Thank you.